I've had all kinds of clerical troubles this week, and I think it's often not talked about in any of these businesses how much of a headache transaction coordination can be. And this is tricky. Welcome, everybody, to the Big Picture Blueprint. It's just Mason and I coming at you today, and we have a bit of a different show where we're going to be just talking about what we're doing in business today, deals we're doing, troubles we're having, what we see for the future, and I think it'll be a good one. So, how are things going, Mason?
Man, things are good. I feel like it's almost a not pivotal time in business for me, but it feels like you and I are both coming to terms with some realizations that we've had through mentors and people that we've connected to and related to, and just adapting our business a little bit. So excited for this show, where it will essentially be the conversations that you and I had at the gym for years before you decided to move out to California and become a surfer boy and get a girlfriend and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, man, I think one thing that you and I have been talking a little bit more about is owner financing and really trying to get a lot of notes that are performing. It's interesting because I feel like that was one of the main goals I had initially when jumping into this business. But through just various things happening and restrictions on capital and access to capital, I was so much more focused on how can I get as much cash back as quickly as possible. And then you start having all these transactions and the sine wave of the business. You're like, man, it'd be great if I could just put my money into something that gives me, 8, 9, 10, 12% return on a monthly basis consistently that I don't have to think about. And that's owner financing land notes, where, I mean, this week alone, I cashed checks from a few different owner financing deals that I had. And I got about 7,000 in owner financing, payments this week, which is fantastic. And it's not usually that high. One seller or one buyer that I worked with, he was behind 2 months, so he had to pay and catch up and pay late fees. And then the other one just wanted to pay a quarter in advance. But consistently, we're making, 4 or 5 grand a month on owner financing notes. And if I can double or triple that, it starts getting really attractive. So but it really starts with the structuring of deals. So I know you've been meeting with a landowner or land investor that's been doing this a lot longer than we have, and they have a pretty substantial note portfolio, right?
Yeah, beyond him too, I happen to run into a couple people who have big land businesses where they sell everything on terms. And just for a little history, just like Mason, I started by selling most of my stuff on terms. But same issue. I didn't have a ton of capital or net worth. And so I quickly thought, oh, let's move to cash. And I moved to almost entirely infill, where builders who are going to build immediately were buying, or end users who are just going to build their home. And so those people didn't really want financing. And so several things have kind of come together to also bring me back to this strategy where I met a couple people who have substantial businesses selling entirely on terms. I have more of my own cash, and I'm also doing more recreational or just rural land in conjunction with the infill, which is better served selling on terms. And I think probably the biggest kind of light bulb moment for me is when I realized, we had John Jasniak on the show, and he talked about arbitraging seller financing on the buy, where he buys at X and then wraps that and sells off the individual pieces of the subdivided parcel on seller financing at a much higher price and at a higher interest rate. And same with a couple of the other people I met. And if you actually look at the numbers, if you buy a piece of land for X, finance it at 8%, sell it for collectively 2X at 10 to 12% interest, those numbers are astronomical. And then you're able to use less of your own cash. And so it's just like a light bulb moment where, like, man, this is more the move where I don't have to get deals at as deep of a discount. I can buy bigger properties and just make tremendous returns with this strategy. And so I'm still going to do the cash flips, but I am selling more and more on terms as well.
Yeah, and it makes sense where this group that I'm working with, they've got a ton of property in Colorado. They buy it pretty much at about 1,000 an acre, and then they sell it anywhere from 3 to 4,000 an acre. And the terms that they offer for seller financing is 10% down, 10.5% interest up to 30 years fixed. And one thing that they do that I've never seen anyone else do is they'll offer an improvement package of up to $50,000 with the same terms to go towards well, septic, electric, driveway fencing if there's anything left over after well and septic. And that right there is getting a tremendous amount of interest. And me working as a realtor, now I'm representing a buyer for one of their properties. I just met with some other buyers yesterday that are interested in buying several more. And some of these people are new, like they're brand new. They want to build a homestead and have a little farm or something like that. Some of them, this is just something they do kind of on the side. They buy land, they run cattle out there. And this seller financing package works really well, just like what Dan's saying, for this particular type of property that is more that rural recreational. Maybe they'll build a house one day, but that's less so the focus of it, because typically people are not going to have the cash to go do a brand new construction. They're going to, while holding a land note, they're going to have to get a new construction note, which typically if you're holding the first position, a lot of times the first position lien holder is not going to be willing to subordinate that loan to the construction lender or whoever is bringing in the financing for that, which is why what Dan says on the seller financing on the infill lots that a new home's going to be built right away, it doesn't work. But these rural acreage, where you think about the math on that, of 35-acre lot that was purchased for 35 grand, sold for 100 grand, 10% down, you get, give or take, call it about 8%, 7% of your capital back, because you're paying realtor commissions, you're paying fees on closing and everything like that. But 100,000 at 10.5% over 30 years, that ends up being something like 400 grand in interest payments over the entirety of it. And so even if it's paid off early, which now I can understand why people are like, actually, I'm okay if it's not paid off early, because your break even number ends up being about 3 years down the road. And then you get 27 years of like that infinite return period that everybody talks about, which is really, really substantial. And I get it, of you don't get the same benefits of, depreciation that you get on single family or multifamily or just, physical asset rental properties and stuff like that. But I mean, that's just, additional income that comes in every month that you don't have to think about. In worst case scenarios, you just take the property back and do a foreclosure or a deed in lieu of foreclosure on these people.
Yeah, it's really powerful when you start to run the numbers. And I think early on, I just was I have to get all my cash back on day one, which if you don't have a lot of money, then it is what it is. But once you have a bit of money and you think about allocation, because as investors, that's really all we're doing is allocating our resources, i.e. our cash and time. And suddenly I think, I can set my money in the bank at 4% on a CD, or I can get 12%, or if I'm selling obviously higher than I bought, what does that percentage come out to collectively? Much, much, much higher. And you suddenly see the appeal.
Well, and I think something to recognize is Dan and I are finally getting to the point in our businesses where we're comfortable with that diversification as an investment strategy, as one of the buckets that we have. Where I was talking to a lender that financed the purchase of a few hundred acres that I bought and subdivided, about, hey man, we're not getting much traction. We sold 1 out of the 4, so he's got about a third, or 1 out of the 5, he's got about a third of his money back. I don't get paid until he reaches a certain threshold. I was like, I'm selling these other ones like hotcakes out here that have these particular seller financing terms. So if we were to sell them on these terms, what percentage could I pay for the notes for you to get your cash back, and then me hold these notes for the next, 5, 10, 30 years? And he was like, why would you ever want to do that? I like making, X amount of money in my sleep, for anything. Like I won't get out of bed to make less than 15%. And the thing is, if your cost basis is low enough on the land, you're making a lot more than what amounts to be, 10, 12% interest or whatever interest you're charging. But it's also for us of staying within our lane of having an asset class that we feel really comfortable as an investment strategy, because after experiencing what I've experienced over the last handful of years of the sine wave, of having great months and then bad months of if I can just have enough notes where I've got 15 to 25,000 a month coming in notes, then I really don't have to think about things. And that's the phase of life that we're in. And he's further along. He makes a tremendous amount of money in his active business. He's a mortgage lender. So as I continue to make more and more money in my active business, and I can just put stuff aside that's vertically integrated into my current business, and it pays me every month like a decent and fair return. That's a great strategy to have that really just keeps me and my family safe. So yeah, there are ways to make more money on your money until there aren't, because I've had plenty of deals. I sold a deal a week and a half ago. I lost like $44,000 on this deal. I thought I was going to make 200 grand and I lost 44 grand. The active income generating whenever it comes to a flipping model isn't always there. And whenever you can have your money in a bank that pays you 11% on a cost basis of 30%, ends up being really, really significant returns that are actually passive for the most part.
Yeah, and I think with that guy, I mean, you'd be buying him out, so there's a big cash outlay, but if you really showed him on a spreadsheet what you can do with this, the numbers are outrageous. And I especially realized, too, once you start earning interest on your interest, right, that's when the curve starts to go upwards quickly. That's when compounding kicks in. And this occurred to me because I have a not great deal that's selling in like 2 weeks. I bought it at 135. We thought it would sell around 210. Well, Florida really slowed down in this area, and 8 months later, I'm selling it at 160 on terms. However, most of that money that I bought that with was just cash from rental properties that they generated. So essentially interest. And now there was a little spread there. I'm selling at 160. So there's a little tiny baby spread there. And I'm getting 10% interest on interest, and then and that is how over time you take a little bit of money and it compounds, and you wake up in 10 years and you have $10 million, or just as an example, that's how the compounding really starts to take hold. And so I think the seller financing is one of the best ways to do that, because banks certainly don't get 12% on their money.
Well, I mean, let's talk about that one of how much cash do you personally have into that deal at this point in time? So whatever you put in minus whatever you got back on the down payment.
Oh, well, it doesn't close. It hasn't closed yet. It's all my cash. So 135, 136, whatever. And I'm getting 30% down, which is like on 60,000, which would be like 48 grand. And then after realtor fees and everything, I'll pay my acquisition guy. I'll get like 35 out of it. So like 100 grand. And then the monthly payment's $1,500 a month. It's a 10-year AM at 10% interest.
So 1,500 a month times 12, that's 18,000 divided by 100,000. So your cash on cash return is eight.
Calculator.
I did have to use a calculator. Well, I thought the math was going to get a lot harder, but your cash on cash return in the first year is 18%. So your payback period's going to be, 5 years and 50 days or something like that until you get all your cash back. Or worst case scenario, they pay you back, they pay you off early, which is not the worst case scenario really. But an 18% cash on cash return, which is how a lot of, I feel like, investors think about things of, okay, well, if I can go buy this rental for 500,000, I put 100 grand down, and if I can get a 10% cash on cash return, that's a great deal. And you're not going to get a cash on cash return. It's going to, principal pay down that you don't actually get in your pocket, which that's something that's nice about the seller finance notes with land is it's not just going to like pay down this mortgage somewhere that this other note holder holds. You're the note holder.
Yep.
So all that principal that's coming back is getting realized to where you can actually go put that money to work in something else. And it's also not going towards maintenance reserves or anything like that for whenever something inevitably breaks, where right now my wife and we're moving and we're renting out our house. We put it on the market yesterday. We've gotten like 15 inquiries and like 5 applications within 12 hours at this point. We're doing all this stuff. We just put in a concrete patio. We're replacing all the fence. We're doing everything to make it like as low maintenance as possible. And we're going to cash flow a couple $100 a month. We'll do a cost seg study on it and do some depreciation offset, other income that we have. And it's great. But for me to make 300 or 400 a month, in a seller finance note on a piece of land, I'd only have to spend like 10 grand on the property, and sell it at 15 or 20, and then just take home those monthly payments every month. So that's something that I feel like has been on our mind a lot, of how to actually build a pretty substantial note portfolio, where I don't know if you compartmentalize your thinking in the way that I do, Dan, but like for me, I'm like, okay, my cost of running this business is not based on cost of goods sold, but just employee expense, paying myself, marketing, systems, software, and everything like that. I only need about like 10 to 20 grand, depending on the month, for everything.
Yeah.
Which I'm at like 5,400 a month in seller finance notes, right now, because I'm working on building them back up just like you are. And that right there, like it adds up. And if I can just never think about my business expenses again, then that helps me focus on the active income generating stuff, which for me now is, it's still the small land flips and some of the bigger land flips, which we'll talk about the active deals we're doing right now. But it's the realtor stuff for me of, if continue at the pace that I got since I got my license 2 weeks ago, it'll be an extra 3-4 grand a week that I'm making just being a realtor. That kind of adds up.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think that's all well said, and we're in a similar mindset there, but let's move on to a different topic, since don't want to spend all the episode talking seller financing. Let's see, what else is going on? I've had all kinds of clerical troubles this week, and I think it's often not talked about in any of these businesses how much of a headache transaction coordination can be, and this is tricky. I know you're hiring that transaction coordinator for your realtor business, but tell me if you're going to do it for your land business. I'm not sure. It's very up and down. Well, there'll be a week or two where the closings are smooth. They take little to no time. And it's like, oh, I'm so glad we didn't have a transaction coordinator for that. And then there's a week like this where it's just dozens of emails and we had, I don't know, 6 or 7 closings this week. And it's just been a huge pain in the ass. So talk to me about it. Are you hiring your TC for both businesses, or what does that look like?
So for now, it's just going to be the realtor business. I think it's funny where, so far it's been good. Nothing happens yet till it actually happens. But I got licensed, I guess, about 2 weeks ago, maybe 2.5 weeks ago, as of the recording of this episode. Got my first buyer deal under contract, listed my first property myself. And as I'm going through all of the documents and using CTM and using, my compliance with the brokerage and everything like that, I'm like, I feel really incompetent. And it's the first time I felt really incompetent in quite a while, which is, a certain degree of stress with that. But I had a conversation right before we recorded this podcast, with a TC that I'm hiring that knows the brokerage software, knows all the software. They love this stuff. And I pay them per transaction. It'll be a couple $100, which even on the small margin deals is so worth it to me. And we'll iterate and work and create a system where it's, really start to finish, not just the, transaction, but assistant services and everything like that, that makes it to where I can go out and produce. Because I have spent more time fiddling with these softwares and, the contracts and making sure everything goes through, I type everything in the right way and send it out in the right way, than I did meeting with the people that I actually got the deal. And so if I can replace that time that I'm spending on the clerical and administrative stuff, with going out and getting more deals, it's so beyond worth it to me. But for the land business right now, like our transaction volume is not super high. We've got, maybe 1 or 2 under contract to sell right now, which it takes a little bit of time, but working with the same title company over and over and over again, like everything is done electronically. I go stop by the office to go notarize the stuff just because I like seeing them. It adds a certain amount of social equity with them. But right now it's just for the realtor business. But I also have some assistant services in my land business where I feel like you don't have that quite yet.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I mean, the acquisition guys do a lot of the transaction coordination, but I'd say one of the other headaches in my business is just everything is harder in the Carolinas. There's more paperwork to sign. They're very backwards in how they do things. They want to ship checks. They want to mail everything. They can't close off the scans. So that's part of it. Um, but I was just curious how you're handling that. We don't have to spend a bunch of time on that. Uh,
No, and I think it's the important thing to note about all this is just figure out what you're good at and what brings in the most money, and figure out what's taking away the most amount of time from you, and figure out, okay, does it make sense to delegate this? Because I think and we've talked about this over the years on this podcast, the thing that we should not have delegated at the beginning was sales. Um, and it's a good reminder of being in this business of, I met these buyers once. I messaged them on Facebook, showed them 2 properties. They trusted me, and now we're doing a deal. I won't make a ton of money. I'll make $3,000 on it, but it was one day going out and looking at property, which, was a total amount of time of like 2 hours, like inclusive of drive time and meeting time. And I've spent far more time working on the contracts and the paperwork and everything like that, that if I had a TC that was able to do it all for me, and I still have the legal obligation to review everything, I would be much more excited about this transaction, because it was fun work. It was something I actually enjoyed. And yeah, it's only $3,000, but I had fun doing it. So if you can figure out what you're good at, what you have fun at, and the things you hate, that are potentially, there's another personality out there that loves it, delegate that as quickly as you can.
Yeah, that's one thing I miss about being in Colorado. I'd always use an excuse to go work in the field by looking at my projects and properties with friends, and then you're really just hanging out talking business, and that is more similar to what you get to do with going to these properties in person. But one one thing I wanted to bring up, just about it pertains to kind of this whole conversation. These conversations we would have at the gym and realities of business that aren't talked about. I had to let an employee go yesterday, and it's not fun. Mason started managing people really early in life, and so did I. I mean, I managed people in high school and college, and then my own people when I started my business, and I've had to fire a lot of people. And I know Mason's a bit of a cold-hearted sociopath, so I don't think it hurts him, but I hate letting people go. It's not fun, and that's just something you have to deal with when you hire and ultimately fire people. So I thought we should talk about it.
Yeah. I mean, I don't like firing people. I've only enjoyed firing one person. That was my very first firing. I was working at a hospital. I oversaw, this was my first leadership position. If you don't count me being an assistant manager of a pool store when I was 16, who did I assistant manage? No one there. It was me and the manager. There were 2 people that worked there. But I was like 24 years old. I oversaw the dietary department, the maintenance department, and then all the outpatient services. And this was our director of dietary, who over the last, year and a half, I'd gotten to know pretty well. I wouldn't have considered him exactly a friend, but he was, a likable person that I worked with. And he, kind of goofy, kind of unprofessional, but there is a certain culture, for people that have worked in the restaurant industry of, there's less professionalism, in the restaurant industry, especially back of house sometimes. And it got to the point where he, groped an employee. And to me, like, that's so far beyond anything, performance related. And regardless of the fact that he ran a pretty tight kitchen and did a good job, like, it was a really easy firing. Didn't matter that him and I joked around for years. It was just, hey, that was so beyond, like, the boundaries of everything, where that's an easy firing, as versus where other firings that I've had to do throughout my career, where the person's really likable and really ethically great, but the performance just isn't there. Those are the painful firings, because you're disrupting someone's life. That's a source of income for them, their family, and their kids a lot of the time. And it's a little bit different in kind of this entrepreneurial wild west, where everyone's used to commission only, and maybe some base or whatever, and they flip jobs every year or two. But it doesn't change the fact that it's really, really painful, because you're taking someone's livelihood away. because they were incapable of doing a job, which is just like a shitty reality for everyone involved.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's well said. I had one guy in college when I managed that landscaping company who threatened to kill me after firing him, and he had been in prison, so he meant it. Don't start a landscaping business, by the way. Just as an aside, when I hear Hormozy or different people talk about, oh, landscaping, such a great opportunity. There's no good landscapers. Well, good luck with the talent pool that you have to hire from. Better wear your bulletproof vest when you go to work. But anyways, no, it's not pleasant, and this was definitely the latter of those two examples where it was a good person and just was not performing. And ultimately, I was losing money on the payroll dollars, so had to let him go. You have to do hard stuff like this all the time. I'd say one thing that it's just a reality in business is you're having the hard conversations all the time.
I think something to remember too about what you're saying, and whenever you're doing all these hard things in business, is balancing all of the emotion that is inherent to risking your own capital. And it feels different whenever you're hiring someone and paying them salary out of your own money that you've generated in the business, and being able to remove that a little bit. And also recognizing it usually takes like 3 to 6 months before people can really add value in a business. So whenever you're thinking of the role that you're hiring for, and if it's a sales position, and especially if it's a sales position where they have direct relevant experience, not just like, hey, we're taking a car salesman and putting them in a land sales position. We're taking a land salesperson and putting them in another land sales position. That timeline to add value needs to be shortened a little bit, because we know the deal cycle time is going to take a long time. But if you feel like it's, okay, well, I'm comparing them to other people in the organization or benchmarks that we've created, and they're just not adding any value to me, it can become a dangerous thing of you're wasting payroll dollars, or it was one phone call away until they got the next deal. So I think there is a delicate balance there with employee management, hiring and firing. But if usually there's not just one issue. Usually the salesperson that's not performing, it's not just because they can't close deals. They're not updating the CRM. Their notes are crap. Like they're not doing all the things that are actually within their control. And they're not adapting or training, which is something that's on you as the manager to, spend time with them and make sure that they're, you're doing call reviews and they sound good and they're performing in the way that you would expect. But just wanted to add that to it. It's hard. It's hard managing people.
All right, so let's talk a bit about deals. What are we doing? And I'll give you a quick background. So for me, I'm really trying to effectively mix the small quick flips, well, just quick flips, not necessarily small, with the larger subdivide, and that kind of goes hand in hand with the seller financing play. And so, there's a market in North Carolina where prices in this little subdivision have accelerated dramatically. These lots used to sell for next to nothing. Water, sewer, power, infill, quarter to half acre, paved roads, a nice community in a nice part of North Carolina. But the HOA didn't do everything they're supposed to, and it kind of got mostly built out as far as the amenities and then just left. And so these owners are all out of state and they've just been sitting there. But everything around it got really expensive. And so over time now, there's starting to be demand. And I watched this area. This is not the first time I've seen this. I've seen this happen a lot of times. I watched this area go from being $4,000 to $8,000 per lot to suddenly they're selling in the 20s, and everything listed is 30 to 40 plus, and there's still demand. And so these sellers are used to getting offered a few $100s for their properties. So we're buying them for anywhere from 4 to 12,000, depending on the size, and flipping them for 20 to 25,000, depending on the size. And so they're quick, easy flips. And then adding to that, I've got that 640 acre piece in Colorado that we're buying, subdividing and selling off on terms. Other larger pieces in Colorado, I'm selling off on terms. So just trying to really effectively mix the small and the big, and then still have a couple new construction projects going up as well.
Exactly. And it's always the case of they're not just bad on the phones. They're not doing everything that they're supposed to be doing, because you can look at someone and be like, well, they just sound a little awkward on the phone, but their notes are really good. And I think they're trainable. And then you kind of determine, oh, well, they're not a salesperson, or they're a really messy salesperson. It's like, who do you want? Do you want the person that's closing all the time and their paperwork's not perfect? Yeah, honestly, that's what you want in the sales position. So hiring and firing the right talent is something that we're constantly dealing with. And it's a daily thing of managing people. And managing salespeople is just weird, but, well, Dan, like what deals do you have going on? What do your deal structures look like right now? Of what you work on this week?
So the county is great. I have been doing business in this county since 2022. And this subdivision, it has hundreds or thousands of lots. And I had always ignored it. If you look at my polygon on prop stream, it goes right around this area because it had been so cheap, right? We had accidentally mailed there, not knowing when we were new, and looked at the comps. I go, I don't want a lot that's worth $6,000. And what happened is everything around it got very expensive. It's a desirable area. It's in North Carolina, which has continued to be a good market, generally speaking. And we got a lead there. And one of my acquisition managers put it under contract at $12,000. And I look at him, I'm like, what are you doing? This, I don't know about this. And I looked at the recent comps and it'd come up a bit. They're not still selling at 8,000, but there were some in the teens, the upper teens. But everything listed was at, I want to say at the time, at least upper 20s. And I talked to a realtor who we know in the area who sold a bunch in that neighborhood. And she goes, yeah, the demand here is really strong. And then we watched, I gave it a few days, and then those listings in the 20s went pending. I go, oh, okay. And so there's no easy way to answer your question other than if you're doing business in a market consistently over years and you have intimate knowledge, you can of that market, you can just find these things. When I was doing business in Pueblo West exclusively in 2019, 2020, at the end of 2020, I watched the same thing happen where Colorado Springs went nuts. People migrated southbound I-25, and lots that were selling at for 10 to 15 were suddenly in 2021 selling at 30 to 35. And so I went crazy in that market with a similar dynamic. So I don't have a simple answer beyond being an expert in your market, and having resources and people there allows you to see these trends and capitalize them. So we sent a bunch of mailers there, and with like 400 mailers, got 6 or 7 deals. And they're not huge, but we'll make 8 to 12,000 on all of them.
And you've had this happen a few times in your land investment career where you've been in a market, you've been making okay money, it's been fine, and then you overnight the prices double or triple or quadruple. And the answer to finding markets like this can't just be, pick somewhere that, and it'll eventually happen to you. What market indicators led you to start doing business in those markets at all? Or was it just the fact that it was, you found, and answer it how you want, but, you found this particular subdivision within this market that you liked, that you're like, okay, this has similar indicators or something like that?
Yeah, you've got a lot going on, but what I wanted to pull out is pertaining to the gold mining claim in Alaska, where there's 2 things there. Number one, I always call that the takeaway when you just come back to a seller and just, whether it's their price is too high or the land is just not worth much in your mind, you say, look, guys, I'm sorry. I can offer you almost nothing for this. Let's just part as friends. I've gotten some killer deals that way, just like you did. And the second thing I want to point out, doing a deal where you don't really know what you're doing, but the replacement cost as is just of those tools and machines is worth more than what you're buying it at, there is just no way to lose. And those are the types of bets you want to take where, there's potentially not that much upside. Maybe, you never know, you might run into, but there's really no downside. And there is potential for tremendous upside. I bought one in Colorado where there was an old mobile home, a working well, a septic, and power and a transformer for $38,000. Like, there's just no way to lose. I don't know exactly how much I'll end up selling it for, but like, that is a good investment. What Mason's doing is essentially the same thing, where he could just sell off the truck and the bulldozer and the equipment and get his money back, and then, sell the land for something if it's, if there's something wrong that he's missing. So those are the types of bets you want to take.
Which is amazing. And I think one additional thing is when you find these failed developments where everything's been done on them, we don't mean a failed development of just the paper lots, of The developer came in, split all the properties. There's utilities completed. When you can find those, just keep an eye on it. Even if they're not transacting at this moment, start doing deals around them. And, potentially if you're buying and holding for the long term, you could potentially buy a bunch of them as a more speculative investment, assuming that, hey, down the road, if I can buy 50 of these for, $5,000 each and hold them for 10 years or 5 years or something like that, it is an opportunity. But I think it's how long you're in the game and in a particular market where you're going to find out information about these particular developments that, you know, it, it just takes time doing business in that particular market. So, stuff I've got going on right now, just signed closing paperwork. I think we close early next week on a property I've owned for quite a while, out in Park County, Colorado. I did like a half dozen deals, and I thought, for a while we were going to just keep this property for ourselves and build a little cabin, and then decided we'd rather have the cash back. And it was my favorite lot out there, and I thought it was going to sell really quickly, and it didn't. It's been a couple years, but bought it for 10. We're selling it for 38. So, it wasn't like a stressful thing having my own cash on the market for that long. So that's a nice little one. Still making decisions on a couple of the other deals that I have in the pipeline where they're better serve as new construction deals rather than just the simple land flip. The margins just aren't there. So still working numbers on those ones in two different markets. I've talked about it a couple times on social media. We're buying 3 gold mining claims in Alaska. Have worked with this seller before. They tried to sell it not on market, but off market for the past couple years, and just no one's really bought it. But they also haven't shared coordinates or haven't shared any information about it. So I can tell that they haven't gone about it the right way. I spoke with a broker out there. We think we'll be able to move it somewhere in between 500 and 750. 750 is what we're listing it for. And I made the offer I didn't even make an offer to them. I told them, look, I can't do this deal. I don't know what I'm doing with gold mines. I don't know anything about Alaska. It's outside of my buy box. It's just too much money for me to risk on it, even if the upside's pretty high. With the price of gold where it's at, I think there's excitement about gold mining right now. But I told him I'd have to pay next to nothing. I'd need to pay 30,000 or, 20 to 30,000. And then I got a call a couple days later of, hey, we'll accept that if you can actually pay that. And so we're buying it for 30 grand. Comes with a ton of equipment, excavator, bulldozer, F-150, bunkhouses, everything like that. So worst case scenario, I can sell off the equipment to some other miner out there and get more than my money back. Even if we were to sell it at 20% of list price, I'm still making more than triple my money on it. So we'll see. That's one that could be, a life-changing deal, or if it's not a scary amount of capital for me to risk. But I think a lot of my time right now, beyond continuing to do all the land flips, which we've got land flips going on throughout Colorado. We're funding that one deal in South Carolina, which will be a nice one. Buy for 175, sell for 290, already under contract to sell it. I'm spending a lot of time as an agent right now to really beef up the active income generating, where it's small deals, similar to these deals that you're doing in the different markets where you're flipping and making, a few grand. Same thing with me on the agent side of not spending too much time on each deal, but it'll make me a few grand per transaction. And I'm already working on slowly starting to recruit some agents to work with me out here to be able to expand my business with the transaction coordinators and everything like that. But getting connected to people, like you, Dan, where I'll sell all your land for you, especially with you guys offering owner financing. Of these people that are doing this are so tired, and it doesn't matter to them whenever it takes 2 or 3 or 4 years to sell each property that they're doing these large subdivides on. For me, I'm eager and excited to list them with the highest and best quality marketing, send it and blast it off everywhere, and operate as a land agent should operate, which most agents are not doing that and focusing on this, smaller subset of the market. So that's really where a ton of my time's going. But I'm excited about it. It's a fun type of work. I think there's probably a part of me that always kind of wanted to be a realtor, beyond selling my own properties, selling other people's properties, and representing buyers. Um, but yeah, that's kind of what my day-to-day meeting with buyers, meeting with sellers, all sorts of different stuff.
I think it definitely matters. I think that you'll get more people to call and create more demand and potentially multiple offers and competition if you price it right. Whereas if you're too high, there's a good portion of retail buyers and builders who won't even make the call to inquire or to make a low offer. This is really important. I'm glad you brought this up, where we're accustomed to making low offers. I was talking to someone the other day about this 640 I have under contract in Colorado, and it was listed at 465, and I said, "Oh, I think I'll offer 400." He's like, "Whoa, that's low." I'm like, "Are you kidding me? I thought that was generous. Like, that's only 65,000 off of ask, which is, I don't know, some percentage of it." And so we just have a whole different frame around what's normal, and where a lot of people, I'll never forget this. I don't remember the exact numbers, but when I was doing everything myself, this was in my first few dozen deals. I had this lot in Colorado, and it was for sale at, let's just say, 50. I don't remember exactly. And there was a buyer I was talking to, and she goes, "Oh, I like that one." And she never made an offer. And I followed up. I said, "Why didn't you make an offer?" She goes, "Well, I can't pay 50. Like, "Well, what can you pay?" And she's like, "Well, I'd pay like 44. I mean, it was that small of a difference. And I'm like, "Oh, make the offer." And in her mind, it was like, "Oh, that's too, I can't do that. I can't. That's insulting." And so keeping that in mind, pricing strategy is very important. And I would rather list a little bit low and end up with a bunch of offers than list too high and just have nothing. What do you think?
For sure. When I'm looking of like Volvo excavators, I'm seeing anywhere from, 35,000 for super old, cheapest one to, multiple hundreds of thousands of dollars. And same thing with a bulldozer, same thing with a truck and all the additional equipment, and everything associated with it. And what's interesting about this deal is, the agent that I'm working with requires a $25,000 retainer in order for me to work with them, and they're charging 20% commission on the deal. So, the retainer is obviously reimbursed upon the sale out of their commission, but I mean, I'll be all in on this deal. Call it 60 grand out of pocket, and if we sell it at list price, which I do need a calculator to do this math, Dan, I'll make $570,000 because I get that 25 grand back. So, to me, the upside is just so high. And the fact that, like I said, okay, well, say I sell it at, 20% of list price at 150,000 minus the 20% commission, which still need a calculator to do this, I'm still walking away with 90 grand or tripled my money, which is the best potential upside I've ever had on a deal, to be able to sell it that far below. So I'm excited about it. I'll probably go out to Nome to kind of go on that adventure. Part of me wants to, try gold mining, because gold's still so expensive, and you go pull 100 ounces off that make 300 grand. But that's beyond what I would be capable of doing. And I think my wife would hate me if I went and started gold mining in Alaska for no reason at all. But yeah, that's an interesting one. Something else that we've been kind of thinking about related to everything is just pricing strategy, where, for this gold mine, obviously we're going to list high, and that's part of the way the agent, that they work. They only work for so much money because he's flying from Washington to go out to Alaska, all that kind of stuff. But with that being said, we have other properties that have been sitting for a while. And I think part of the reason they're sitting for a while is because we're not offering those competitive owner financing terms. And so I think when going into anything that you're doing, including our rental house, of like, we rented just slightly below what we see other people putting their house on the market for, we're getting a tremendous amount of activity right off the bat. how much thought are you putting in with all of these deals, whether it's the bigger, splits or the ones, in the markets where you're doing just these info lots on listing at the appropriate price? And does it even matter if like the demand's there and people know what they're paying for it?
Well, let me say one more thing on that. For rental property, especially, you're not doing a one-time transaction. You're getting a long-term customer. And getting a good customer is very, very important. Where you're selling a property, all they have to do is wire money one time. With a tenant, they have to make good on their word on the contract month after month. And so I am far more okay with lower rent and exceptional tenants than selling a property at a low price. I'll tell you, anyone in this business or who isn't in the business and wants to get in, turnover will be your base expense. I have tenants that I have not raised rent on in 6 years. And I'm not planning to because she's fantastic. And I have a number of examples of that. So just a thought there. And then with the land, selling the land, my only caveat would be if you have something really, really prime. And for example, one of the best land deals I've ever done was in Miami, in the county, not Miami-Dade County, not in the city. And I've never seen demand for land like this ever. And that one we priced too low. We should have just pushed it because there was not a single property for sale and there was so much demand. And so it's a spectrum, but that's at least how I think about
I think it's funny because I almost feel like I wish we had listed our house to rent for more money. 2,100. It's a 3.2. So it's a little bit less than what's in the neighborhood, but our pictures look really good. Our, the house is updated and everything like that. I think it's a really fair price, and we'll cash flow, 400-ish a month, and after pet rent, a little bit more than that. But I do think that I would rather have an influx of applications and offers and leave a little bit of meat on the bones and move the transaction quicker. And regardless of if it's owner financing or if it's just a cash deal or if it's a rental property. So I think that when you start getting too greedy and start getting concerned with the what ifs, that's when you end up losing. Because in hindsight, like with that deal that I lost like 40 some odd $1,000 on, I would have been so much happier if I had made $2,000 on and sold it, 2 years ago. And I think it's a big learning curve of like, if you can transact quickly, and then if you can hold the note for a long time whenever you're, actually have meat on the bones, that's kind of always the best way to go about it. Because there is a speculative nature in a lot of the deals we do. Some of, and I'm trying to reduce that of like, okay, I don't really want to take on any more speculative deals, unless, the cost basis is just so low, it's a non-issue. So I think I will always try and moving forward, try to price at the bottom of, what we see going on the market, just to start moving things quicker, even though the margins are less than. So yeah, pricing strategy is something that's really at the forefront of my mind right now.
Yep. I have one more thought that I want to say, or one more topic. You mentioned quote unquote cash flow on the rental house and it's not that much money, blah, blah, blah. And I just think the whole idea that cash flow is the goal when you're building a rental property is absurd. Where now that I've done this for a while and have a bunch of rentals, the value has been the appreciation, the tax savings. Yes, I just told you I bought a property mostly with cash flow from rentals. Great. But that took a long time. That was years of that. It's more been the appreciation, the depreciation, and then the leverage where I have all this equity sitting in these properties and I can use that equity at low rates to make more money. So one of my houses has a line of credit, for example, and then I use that to do deals and then I make money. And it's just, the longer I do this, it is true that it's easier to make money once you have money because we can just jump on opportunities when killer deals come up. We can just do more.
And I wish there was some formula that we could create and give you guys that of like, hey, if this is what the amount of sales per listed is in this particular area, um, then try and do this pricing strategy. But I think that it's just something to consider as versus seeking top of market list price. And that's why working with the right agent is so crucial for me, even working with the seller when that has all these properties on the buy side, like I'm saying, let's negotiate. They have a ton of land. Like let's see if we can get a little bit of money off the deal. And I think that having an agent that serves your best interests is so crucial in the transaction on the buy side and on the sales side, because it's amazing how many it adds up. $5,000 here, 10 grand there, 50 grand here, 100 grand there. It really, really starts adding up whenever you can price right on the buy side and the sell side. So, that was just something that I wanted to bring up because it's kind of top of mind for me right now. The cash flow that we're getting for that rental, we're not touching it. Like it's going into a maintenance reserve account, all of it, because, stuff will inevitably break and go out. But even when it does, having a good amount of equity in the property and being able to use the HELOC, whether or not it's, for investing or, just fixing stuff we're doing not a ton of repairs, but we're, making the backyard really nice. We'll probably, in the next year or so, replace the driveway, maybe do a zero-scape yard, all sorts of stuff, because we plan on holding it for a long time, and all the depreciation benefit that we'll be able to write off, maybe 50 to 100 grand on it, will be really, really nice to offset, additional income. So I think something, that Dan and I are talking about, because we've bounced all over the place today of, from, flipping for cash versus, and trying to move things really quickly versus playing the long game with longer term owner financing notes or rental properties for the tax advantages of it, is being able to have multiple strategies that don't take away from the other ones, that really start compounding, beyond just compound interest on like owner finance notes of, hey, I've got this active income generating business that allows me to put money into the passive note business that also allows me to hold rental properties to reduce my taxable income, and how they all stack together and interlock and intermingle to make it so where it's, okay, if I were to step away from my business right now, how much could I sell everything for? If I were to just be like, you know what, I'm going on a sabbatical for the next 10 years to go live in the mountains of Nepal. What's your business actually worth? Because if you're all in just one box of a bunch of rentals that you did cost segregation studies on that, if you were to sell them, you would have all this depreciation payback or all these notes that you would have to sell at 40 to 50 cents on the dollar, or an active income generating business that you don't actually have the ability to sell. If you were to sell your business, what would it actually sell for? And I think that's something that we kind of consider as we're building everything together, to have it all mix and match and commingle really, really well.
Yeah. And I definitely, to what we've said in many other episodes, think that these things need to be all related and synergistic. I wouldn't go start 4 unrelated businesses. I think that's just a mess where it's all the same principles and it's the same industry, right? All the different things we're doing, whether we're selling on terms or selling for cash, we're still just selling land. And the rental properties are much less of a time suck and more of just a long term. That's my get rich slow plan, right? That 30-year. Oh, that's one more thing I have to say, because I heard someone talking about, someone was just talking negatively about real estate relative to stocks. And this was someone with a lot of money talking to other people with lots of money. Well, if you don't have a lot of money and you're trying to make your first, couple hundred grand or million in net worth, you can't go get a 30-year loan with 3.5 or 5% down to buy a stock portfolio. You can, however, do that with real estate. And that's a big part of the difference maker is I didn't fully appreciate the power of a 30-year fixed loan at a low interest rate. And that's a big part of the value to me. It's like, shoot, if you can get nice assets that appreciate against a depreciating dollar at a fixed low rate, beautiful. I would take that as much as you can.
Yeah, no, I'm right there with you. But we're just talking about stacking and integrating everything because this is the stuff that we think about. And that's the whole purpose of this show, is just talking through kind of, some of what we've got going on, the good stuff, the bad stuff, the in-between stuff, the short-term stuff and the long-term stuff. Cause, it's really easy to get distracted. And the funny thing that we didn't talk about is like, we're still doing all the same stuff.
Yeah.
We're pulling data, we're sending mailers, we have our employees cold calling, we're negotiating deals, we're filling paperwork out with title companies, and, doing everything in between. And we never stop. Yeah, there's the weird, fun, speculative deals. There's the long-term plans and stuff like that, all of which are possible only because we're doing all of the boring daily tasks that are just required within this business. And that's all business really is. And I think you said it best with the get rich slow idea of, if you can figure out a way to, continually stack, starting with smaller deals, doing more and more and more. It's such bullshit lies whenever people are like, just jump into your first 100-unit apartment complex. Like, do you even know the challenges that go into something like that? You're lying.
Yeah.
And you won't be selling, of course, if you own thousands and thousands of apartment complexes that you devote all your time to your course. Like, you're just lying. So start small, keep growing and growing, and keep figuring out how to integrate more and more into your business that then really compounds. Use leverage to your advantage whenever it makes sense to use leverage, and use your own cash when it makes sense to use your own cash. But you don't have to be so dogmatic in your thinking with whatever investing strategy it is, where, hey, get a good job, be a physician, be an attorney, or do whatever, be an engineer, and put your money into the market that compounds years and years and years down the road, if that's what's for you. But if you're building a business, just think long term, because if you're thinking in the short term of how to get the next deal, like Dan talked about it with the negotiating strategy that we used with this gold mine. This might be the best deal I've ever done in my entire life, bar none. And it might be an average deal, or it might be the not great deal or something like that. But when you start getting desperate, because you need to get rich quick in your business, it's going to come across in your sales calls that you're doing and everything else that you're doing. And it's just going to make you so much less successful as a business owner and an investor.
Yeah. No, I think that was well said and a good way to wrap up. Anything else you want to say, Mason?
No, I don't think so. If you guys made it this far, we'd appreciate any feedback. Dan and I have these conversations all the time, every day. And we just wanted to kind of record a little bit, talking, with each other and at you guys about what we experience in our business and what we're doing, what our days kind of look like. So feel free to like, subscribe, leave a review, reach out to us directly, obviously, to let your thoughts be known. So this is Mason McDonald and Dan Haberkas with the Big Picture Blueprint, signing off.